A man can be running late on the one delivery that pays his son's medical bills and still stop his truck in the middle of a blizzard because some stranger's hazard lights are blinking weakly through the snow. That is not weakness. That is exactly the kind of man Malik Johnson had built himself into, one hard winter at a time. Malik gripped the wheel of his 18-wheeler as the storm outside swallowed the headlights whole, the temperature gauge reading 20 degrees below zero. And somewhere beneath the howling wind he thought he saw a shape that should not have been there. A small sedan pulled crooked onto the shoulder, its hazard lights flickering weaker with every passing second. He did not know yet that stopping to check would cost him his delivery bonus, or that the woman inside that car was running from something far more dangerous than the cold. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from, because what Malik finds inside that frozen car is about to change both of their lives before the sun comes up. The mountain road stretched empty in both directions, snow falling so thick that Malik's headlights barely reached 10 feet ahead of the cab. He had been driving for hours, hauling refrigerated freight toward the city of Ravenport, a route half the other drivers at his company had refused that week because of the storm warnings. Inside the cab, taped near the speedometer, was a photograph of his son Eli, 9 years old, missing his front teeth, grinning at the camera. Beside it sat a small toy truck Eli had given him for luck before every long haul. Malik's phone buzzed weakly, one bar of signal fighting through the storm. A voice memo from Eli. "Dad, Miss Nora says the snow is really bad. Drive slow, okay? I don't need a present, I just need you." Malik's throat tightened and he answered, his voice rough with exhaustion but warm underneath it. "I'll be careful. You keep that truck of mine safe on the dashboard, all right?" He rounded a curve, and that was when he saw it, a weak, irregular blink of hazard lights, nearly buried under snow. He slowed the rig, checked his mirrors out of habit, though there was no one behind him for miles, and weighed for one brief second. Everything stopping might cost him. If I stop, he thought, I might miss the delivery window. I might lose the bonus I need for Eli's inhaler refills. Then he saw the shape of a person slumped against the steering wheel inside that car, and the decision made itself. He pulled the truck onto the shoulder, threw on his emergency flashers, and stepped down into wind that hit him like something solid. Malik crossed to the car, boots crunching through snow already ankle deep, the wind screaming past him with enough force to make him lean forward just to keep walking straight, and knocked hard on the frosted glass, his knuckles aching instantly from the cold. "Can you hear me?" Inside, a young woman turned her head slowly, her lips tinged blue, her eyes struggling to focus. "I can't feel my hands," she whispered. The temperature inside the sedan, when Malik finally got the door open, had dropped so low that frost had formed along the inside of the windshield. A detail that would stay with him for a long time afterward, a small chilling measure of exactly how close he had come to driving past a death he could have prevented. Malik wasted no time on questions. He forced the frozen door handle open with both hands, the metal biting cold even through his gloves, and though she was lighter than he expected, he half carried, half guided her through snow already ankle deep, her weight sagging against him with every third step, talking the entire way to keep her from losing consciousness entirely. "Stay with me. My son's counting on me to bring this truck home in one piece, and I'm not explaining to him why I let a stranger fall asleep in a snowbank." That small, absurd joke was enough to keep her blinking, keep her moving, until he settled her onto the small bed in the back of his cab and cranked the heat as high as it would go. His own father, a machinist who had worked the same shop floor for 30 years, used to tell him that a man's character showed up most clearly in the choices nobody was around to grade him on. Malik had carried that lesson through every year of marriage, through Tanya's illness, through the long, exhausting months of learning to raise Eli alone, and it had settled into him so completely that stopping for a stranger in a blizzard did not feel like a decision at all. It felt like the only thing a person could do and still recognize himself the next morning. Neither of them knew yet that Malik Johnson had just pulled a woman named Ava Whitmore out of a car that had been deliberately sabotaged, or that the very act of saving her life would put both of them squarely between a dying man's fortune and the family member willing to let her freeze to protect it. To understand why Malik was willing to risk his delivery bonus for a stranger, you would have to understand the promise he had made himself the day his wife Tanya died, a promise that shaped every decision he made behind the wheel of that truck. Malik had learned to drive an 18-wheeler in his early 20s, drawn to the work by the particular freedom of a job that let a man be entirely responsible for himself, and no one else, at least until Tanya came along and taught him patiently, and without ever making him feel small for needing the lesson. That being responsible for someone else was not a cage, but a kind of anchor. After she died, the long routes became something different, less an escape, and more a way of staying close to the version of himself she had helped build. The version that still believed stopping for strangers was worth whatever it cost. Tanya had passed 3 years earlier, after a long illness, leaving Malik to raise Eli alone, while working the kind of long-haul routes that paid enough to keep them afloat, but rarely let him be home for more than a few days at a stretch. Before she died, she had told him, gripping his hand in a hospital bed that smelt of antiseptic and quiet grief, "Don't just teach him how to survive out there, Malik. Teach him how to still be kind while he's doing it." He had carried that sentence with him on every mile since. Before any of this, that same morning, Malik had made Eli breakfast in their small kitchen, the boy already dressed for school and reviewing a worksheet about weather fronts with the seriousness of a much older student. "Dad, if a truck slides on ice, does it definitely crash?" "No," Malik said, sliding a plate of eggs across the counter. "Trucks are built with things called jake brakes and tire chains, and drivers like me are trained to handle it if we're careful and don't panic. That's most of the job, honestly. Staying calm when everything wants you to panic. Is that why you're never scared?" Malik considered the question longer than Eli probably expected. "I get scared plenty. I just decided a long time ago that scared doesn't get to make my decisions for me." Eli nodded slowly, filing the answer away the way he filed away most of what his father told him, and Malik kissed the top of his son's head before heading out into a morning already gray, with the first hints of the storm that would, within hours, change the course of his entire week. That morning, before the storm, Eli had asked him over video call, "How many days this time? If the roads are good too? If the weather turns? Maybe 3. Eli had gone quiet in the particular way children go quiet when they are trying not to show something scares them. "I don't like when it snows and you're driving." "I don't love it either," Malik admitted. "But I promise you, I drive twice as careful when it snows." At the dispatch office earlier that week, before any of this began, a fellow driver named Curtis had pulled Malik aside, half joking, half genuinely concerned. "You always take the routes nobody else wants. One of these days that's going to catch up with you. Or it's going to be the reason I'm somewhere I need to be. Right when I need to be there." Malik had answered, not knowing yet how true that sentence would turn out to be within days. At the dispatch office, his supervisor had warned him the Ravenport run was risky this week. Half the guys already turned it down. Storm's supposed to get worse before it gets better. "I need the bonus," Malik had said simply, and that had been the end of the conversation, because everyone at that company understood exactly why Malik Johnson never turned down a hard route if the pay was good enough to matter. Now, with Ava wrapped in blankets in the back of his cab, shivering less violently. With every passing minute, Malik understood that tonight's version of careful was going to look very different from what he had promised his son that morning. "Where were you headed?" he asked, once her teeth had stopped chattering long enough to form words. "Ravenport," Ava said. "I have to be there by 9 tomorrow morning. It's about my grandfather's estate. If I don't show up in person to sign the paperwork, everything goes to my uncle instead." "And you think your car didn't just break down on its own?" Ava's eyes, still glassy from the cold, sharpened at that. "I know it didn't. The electrical system failed all at once. The heater, the lights, the GPS, right after I got off the phone with my uncle telling me to turn back." Ava told him more that night than she had told anyone in years, about growing up in a house where affection always seemed to come with conditions attached. About a grandfather who loved her fiercely, but showed it mostly through high expectations rather than warmth. About a childhood spent learning to read the temperature of a room before she ever learned to trust her place in it. "My grandfather used to say that people who inherit things without earning them usually end up resenting the thing they inherited," Ava said. "I think that's why he built the will the way he did. He wanted me to have to fight for it, the same way he had to fight for everything he built. Seems like a hard way to show love. It was the only way he knew how. He wasn't always right about everything, but he was never dishonest with me, not once. That's more than I can say for most of the rest of..." Malik glanced at her. "Sounds lonely." It is sometimes even now. Ava looked out at the snow, her voice quieter. I used to think being surrounded by people who needed something from me was the same as having people who cared about me. Tonight's the first time in a long time someone helped me and didn't want anything back. Malik studied her for a long moment, weighing what kind of trouble he had just voluntarily driven into. You're not lying to me. I wish I was. He exhaled, glanced at the photo of Eli taped near the dashboard, and made the second difficult decision of the night. Ravenport's on my route anyway, he said. I'll get you there. Ava blinked at him, still shivering slightly despite the growing warmth of the cabin, studying his face as though trying to memorize it, as though some part of her already understood that this particular stranger was going to matter far longer than one blizzard-blurred night. Somewhere behind them, the wrecked sedan sat abandoned on the shoulder, already vanishing under a fresh layer of snow, evidence of a night neither of them would ever fully explain to anyone who had not lived through it. Beside them, Malik kept the memory of that sound, metal ticking as it cooled, witched to screaming past a windshield, already growing opaque with frost, longer than he expected to, and some nights, long after the storm had passed into ordinary memory, he would still wake for no clear reason and check, out of old habit, that Eli's door was closed against the cold. Ava blinked at him, still shivering slightly, despite the growing warmth of the cabin. Just like that? You don't even know me. I know you were about to freeze to death on the side of a mountain road, because somebody wanted you to. That's enough for tonight. The hours that followed carried them deeper into the storm, the cab of the truck becoming its own small, warm world, separate from the howling white outside. The heater fan a steady drone beneath the muffled roar of wind against the windshield. Ava, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of diesel and coffee, studied the photograph near the dashboard. Your son? Eli, 9 years old, thinks this truck is the coolest thing in the world. Where's his mother? Malik's hands tightened briefly on the wheel, an old familiar ache passing through him before he answered. She passed a few years back. Cancer. It's just the two of us now. Ava did not offer the easy, hollow condolence people usually reached for. She only said quietly, that explains why you didn't hesitate to stop for a stranger. How do you figure? Because you already know what it cost to lose someone you could have saved if you'd just tried a little harder. Malik glanced at her, surprised by how precisely she had named something he had never said aloud to anyone. Not even to Eli. Not even to himself on the nights it kept him awake. That's a heavy thing to say to someone you met an hour ago, he said finally. I've had a lot of practice reading people who don't want to be read, Ava said. Growing up in a family like mine, you learn fast who's telling you the truth, and who's just managing you. Which one am I? You're the first person in longer than I can remember who wasn't doing either. You were just being decent, because it didn't occur to you to be anything else. Malik considered that in silence for a while, the wipers beating a slow rhythm against the snow. My wife used to say something close to that most people spend their whole lives performing kindness for an audience. She said the only kindness that counted was the kind nobody was there to see. She sounds like she was smart. She was smarter than me in every way that mattered. They talked for hours as the storm raged outside. Ava explaining her grandfather's estate, a company and a charitable trust that supported hundreds of families, all of it at risk of being sold off piece by piece if her Uncle Richard gained control instead. Her grandfather, a man named Walter Whitmore, had built the company from a single machine shop into a regional employer of nearly 1,000 people. And in his final years had grown increasingly certain that Richard, his own son, was siphoning money out of it through inflated vendor contracts and shell accounts nobody outside the finance department ever thought to question. He never had proof, Ava explained. Just decades of watching Richard live a lifestyle that never quite matched his salary. So he wrote the will the way he did, on purpose. If I don't appear in person to accept my share, everything defaults to Richard's control for at least a year, more than enough time to erase whatever he's been hiding. Malik listened, offering little, but absorbing every detail with the quiet attentiveness of a man used to solving problems methodically rather than emotionally. The same way he approached a jackknife trailer, or a failing brake line, calmly, piece by piece, without letting panic get ahead of the facts. Your uncle sabotaged your car to keep you from an inheritance, Malik said eventually. That's not just greed. That's somebody desperate to hide something. Men don't risk killing family over money they could just as easily fight for in court. That's what I think too. I just haven't been able to prove it yet. Every time I've raised a concern, my own family calls me paranoid, ungrateful, too young to understand how business really works. Sounds like they've been telling you that story a long time. My whole life, Ava admitted. Long enough that some nights I almost believe it myself. You don't strike me as someone who scares easy. I didn't used to be. Then my car died on a mountain road, in the middle of a blizzard 40 minutes after my own uncle told me to turn back. And I realized exactly how far some people will go to keep a story convenient. Twice during the drive, the road narrowed into unmarked stretches, where a fallen tree or a stalled vehicle forced Malik to reroute, climbing down each time to check tire chains in wind that cut through his jacket like it was made of paper. His hands went numb within minutes despite his gloves, and each time he climbed back into the cab, Ava watched him with a mixture of concern and something like awe. You could leave me at the next town and keep your delivery window, Ava said the second time, watching him climb back in, teeth gritted against the cold, snow melting in his beard. I didn't pull you out of a car to hand you off to a bus station in a blizzard. I can pay you, whatever the delivery bonus was worth, I'll cover it and then some. Malik shot her a look that was not quite anger, but close to it. You think I stopped for you because of money? Ava fell silent, chastened, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I stopped, Malik said, quieter now, because somewhere out there, some other trucker might be the one who finds Eli on the side of a road, someday, and I need to believe that stranger stops too. That's not a business transaction. That's just how I try to live. I'm sorry, Ava said. I'm not used to people helping me without wanting something back. It makes me suspicious, even when I don't want it to. Then I guess we've got that in common, Malik said, softening. I'm not used to being helped either. Makes it hard to know how to accept it when it happens. They pressed on through the night, the storm thinning gradually as they descended toward Ravenport. And somewhere past 3 in the morning, Malik's phone buzzed with a call from dispatch, his supervisor's voice tight with frustration. You're going to miss the delivery window, Malik. Client's furious. I know. You're going to lose the bonus. I know that too. Then why the hell are you still on the road instead of turning back for the depot? Malik glanced once at Ava, huddled in the blanket, finally looking less like a woman who might die, and more like a woman determined to fight for what was hers. Because some things matter more than the bonus, he said, and ended the call. The storm outside had not fully broken by the time Malik finally reached the edge of Ravenport, and in the gray half-light of early morning, the city looked less like a destination and more like a place still deciding whether to wake up. He thought, glancing at Ava's pale, determined face beside him, that the same could probably be said for her, a woman standing at the edge of a life she had not fully decided how to claim yet. The road ahead lay quiet in a way it had not been in hours, the storm finally beginning to thin into ordinary snowfall, and Malik allowed himself for the first time since spotting those weak, flickering hazard lights, a slow, steadying breath, the kind a man takes when he realizes the worst of a danger has passed, and he is still standing on the other side of it. The dispatcher back at the depot had called twice more during the drive, each time with less patience than the last, and on the third call, Malik finally let the frustration in his own voice show through, a rare crack in the composure he usually kept locked down tight. I hear you, Malik said. I heard you the first 2 times. I'm not turning this truck around, and if that costs me the job, then it costs me the job. But I'm not explaining to my son someday why I drove past a dying woman to protect a bonus. The line went quiet for a moment. You're a stubborn man, Johnson. So my wife used to tell me. By the time the first gray light of morning broke over the horizon, they were entering the outskirts of Ravenport, the storm reduced to a light, drifting snow that felt almost gentle after the violence of the night before. Ava's phone, charging off Malik's dashboard outlet, buzzed back to life with a dozen missed messages, the most recent from her grandfather's attorney, a woman named Martha Gray. Ava, where are you? The reading begins at 9. If you're not here, Richard assumes temporary control by default. How much time do we have? Malik asked. Ava checked the dashboard clock. 40 minutes. Malik pressed the accelerator as far as safety allowed, weaving through the waking streets of Ravenport, until they reached a stretch too narrow and congested for the 18-wheeler to continue. He pulled over as close as he could to the attorney's office building. I can't get closer without blocking 3 lanes, he said. You'll have to walk the rest." Ava, still weak from the night's ordeal, nodded, gripping the door handle. Malik came around and helped her down, draping his own jacket over her shoulders against the cold. Ava, still weak from the night's ordeal, gripped his arm tighter as they walked, drawing strength she had not expected to find in a stranger's steady presence beside her, thinking, in the brief clarity between exhaustion and adrenaline, that she had spent her whole life surrounded by people who wanted something from her, and had somehow ended up leaning on the one person in years who wanted absolutely nothing in return. "Can you make it? I have to." Malik walked with her, half supporting her weight, through the slush-covered sidewalk, past well-dressed pedestrians, who glanced curiously at the unlikely pair. A trucker in a flannel shirt supporting a disheveled young woman toward the gleaming glass doors of a law office building. Neither of them paying the stairs any mind. Both of them focused entirely on the 40, rapidly narrowing into 30, then 20. Inside, the reading of the will was already underway, Richard Whitmore standing at the head of a polished conference table, halfway through explaining to a room of relatives and executives why his niece's absence proved she was unfit to inherit control of anything. His voice smooth and rehearsed, the voice of a man who had clearly practiced this exact speech more than once in a mirror. "We all loved Ava," Richard was saying, "but the truth is, she's never shown the steadiness this company requires. Missing today, of all days, only confirms what I've suspected for some time." The door opened. Ava walked in, pale, exhausted, wrapped in a trucker's flannel jacket, but very much alive, her boots leaving a trail of melting snow across the polished floor. The room fell into stunned silence. "Ava," Richard said, his voice faltering, the color draining visibly from his face. "You're here." "I am," Ava said. "I know that must be disappointing." Martha, the attorney, rose immediately, glancing at the clock on the wall which read 8:56. "The estate confirms Ava Whitmore has arrived within the appointed window." The reading proceeds as originally structured. Richard's composure cracked at the edges. "This is absurd. She's clearly been through some kind of ordeal. Look at the state of her. Who's to say she wasn't coached or manipulated by whoever she walked in here with?" All eyes turned to Malik, standing quietly near the doorway, snow still melting off his boots, looking entirely out of place among the tailored suits and polished furniture, and entirely unbothered by that fact. "My name is Malik Johnson," he said simply. "I drive trucks for a living. Last night I found her nearly frozen on the side of a mountain road after her car failed all at once, right after a phone call with her uncle telling her to turn back. I didn't manipulate anybody. I just didn't leave her out there to die." Richard's face lost several shades of color. Ava stepped forward, steadying herself against the edge of the table. "My car didn't break down, Richard. Every system failed at once. In a pattern that doesn't happen by accident. It was sabotaged, and I have reason to believe you know exactly how." "That's a serious accusation," Richard said, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence, his eyes flicking toward the attorney, toward the assembled relatives, toward anyone who might offer him an exit from the moment. "It is," Ava agreed, "which is why I intend to prove it, rather than simply accuse you and hope you feel guilty enough to confess." Within the hour, investigators were reviewing garage camera footage that placed a mechanic connected to Richard at Ava's home the night before her departure. The timestamp clearly showing a service van parked in her driveway at nearly midnight, hours after Ava herself had gone to bed unaware. Phone records showed the exact call, warning her to turn back, timed just minutes before her car's electrical system failed completely. A coincidence too precise to survive serious scrutiny. Martha revealed that Ava's grandfather had specifically required her physical presence at the reading, precisely because he had long suspected Richard of quietly diverting company funds through a chain of inflated vendor contracts, a suspicion the will's conditions were designed deliberately to expose, forcing exactly this kind of desperate reaction from whoever had the most to lose. "Your grandfather was smarter than any of us gave him credit for," Martha said quietly to Ava, once the room had begun to empty. "He didn't just leave you a company. He left you a trap, and he was betting Richard would be arrogant enough to walk right into it." Richard's protests grew louder and less convincing, with every new piece of evidence, his voice climbing toward something increasingly unhinged as the room's sympathy visibly drained away from him with each passing minute. Until finally, flanked by 2 officers who had been quietly summoned during the reading, he was escorted out of the building, his composure entirely gone, replaced by the raw panic of a man watching decades of careful manipulation collapse in the space of one morning. "You'll regret this," Richard said, twisting to look back at Ava as the officers guided him toward the door. "This company needs someone who understands real business, not a girl who got lucky because a truck driver happened to be on the right road." Ava met his eyes without flinching. "The company needs someone who doesn't sabotage a car to keep a 19-year-old promise to a dying man from being honored. I think I can manage that much, at least." Richard had no response left to give. Ava's grandfather's photograph, resting at the head of the conference table throughout the reading, seemed almost to watch the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. A stern-faced man in a photograph taken decades earlier, the same careful eyes Ava had inherited, along with, apparently, his gift for laying a trap patient enough to take years to spring. Ava did not celebrate. She sat down slowly at the head of the table, where her grandfather's photograph rested beside the will, and allowed herself, for the first time since the storm began, to simply breathe. Richard had not acted alone in his desperation. In the days following his arrest, investigators traced the mechanic who tampered with Ava's car to a small independent garage on the edge of town, a man named Frank who, once confronted with the evidence, cooperated fully rather than risk a longer sentence protecting a boss who had already abandoned him the moment the scheme unraveled. "He told me it was just a scare," Frank told investigators, visibly shaken. "Said he just wanted her to turn back, not to get hurt. I didn't know it would strand her in a blizzard. I didn't think that far ahead, and I should have." Ava, informed of this later, felt an unexpected flicker of sympathy alongside her anger, understanding, in a way she had not expected to, how ordinary desperation could be talked into doing something monstrous by someone skilled at making it sound small and reasonable. Martha Gray, the attorney, found a quiet moment to speak with Malik before he left the building that morning, her expression thoughtful as she studied him over the rim of her glasses. "Walter Whitmore was a careful man," she said. "He would have appreciated knowing exactly what kind of person ended up being the reason his granddaughter made it here alive. For what it's worth, I don't think it was an accident that it was someone like you. I don't know what you mean by someone like me." "Someone who stops," Martha said simply, "when stopping costs him something. That's rarer than you'd think. In my line of work, I meet a great many people who stop only when it's convenient." Before he left, Malik stepped into the hallway to call Eli and check in properly, giving his son an abbreviated version of the night's events. "You found a whole entire person in the snow?" Eli asked, wide-eyed astonishment audible even through the phone. "I did. Is she okay?" "She's going to be good," Eli said with the simple, absolute certainty of a child who has not yet learned to doubt that good outcomes are the default. "That's what you're supposed to do. Miss Nora says heroes aren't the people who don't get scared. They're the people who stop anyway." Malik smiled into the phone, more moved by his son's easy faith than he knew how to say out loud. "Miss Nora sounds like a smart woman." Malik moved to leave quietly, understanding that whatever came next belonged to Ava's world, not his. "You're leaving?" Ava asked, catching him at the door. "You've got lawyers now. I've got a truck I still need to get back to the depot, and a boy waiting for me at home. You saved my life. You'd have done the same for a stranger stuck in the snow." "I don't actually know if that's true," Ava admitted, "but I know I want it to be, and meeting you made me believe it might be possible." In the days after the will's reading, Malik returned to his depot to find the manager, who had pressed him about the missed delivery window, waiting with an entirely different tone than their last conversation. Having heard, through channels neither of them could quite trace, some garbled version of what had actually happened on that mountain road. "Heard you went and became a hero on my dime," the manager said, not unkindly. "Wasn't planning on it. Client still wants their freight, Malik, but corporates decided the bonus stands. Something about not wanting to be the company that punished a driver for saving somebody's life." The manager shook his head, half amused, half something closer to respect. "Didn't figure I'd live to see the day." Weeks later, once the investigation into Richard concluded, and Ava had formally assumed leadership of her grandfather's company and its accompanying charitable trust, restructuring the finance department from the ground up to close the exact loopholes Richard had spent years exploiting, she reached out to Malik's trucking company, not with a check, though she offered one, and he refused it twice, but with something else entirely. Full reimbursement for his lost delivery bonus, a formal commendation in his personnel file, and a proposal to fund a foundations supporting long-haul drivers stranded in severe weather, complete with emergency shelters along the exact stretch of road where she had nearly died, named, over Malik's strong objection, after his late wife. You didn't have to name anything after her, Malik told Ava, standing in front of the modest, groundbreaking sign weeks later, Tanya's name printed in simple, dignified letters above a description of the shelter's purpose. I didn't do it for you, Ava said, echoing, without quite realizing it, the exact words he had once said to her in the cab of his truck. I did it because a woman who taught her husband to stop for strangers in a blizzard deserves to have her name attached to a place that keeps strangers alive. Malik had no answer for that, beyond a long, quiet moment standing beside her in the cold, looking at a sign that made the private promise he had carried, since Tanya's death suddenly, unexpectedly, public. She drove out to see him in person, a few weeks after that, to deliver a different piece of news, finding him in his small apartment kitchen, helping Eli with a science project about weather patterns, an irony neither of them missed. You didn't have to come all this way, Malik said. I wanted to see the kid who thinks your truck is the coolest thing in the world. Eli, delighted by the unexpected visitor, launched immediately into an explanation of his poster board, detailing wind patterns and pressure systems with the confidence of a much older student, and Ava listened with the same seriousness she gave everything, asking real questions, letting the boy lead the conversation exactly where he wanted it to go. If you're going to keep coming around, Eli said eventually, with the gravity only a 9-year-old negotiator could summon, you have to promise you won't make Dad take fewer hard routes. He likes proving he can handle them. Ava glanced at Malik, amused. I think I can promise that. Also, Eli added, considering the matter further, you have to actually like his terrible truck stop coffee. He'll test you on it. He tested Miss Nora once and she failed. I make excellent truck stop coffee, Malik said, mildly offended. You make coffee that tastes like a tire, Eli said, entirely unbothered by his father's protest. And Ava laughed for the first time since the ordeal on the mountain road, a real unguarded laugh that seemed to surprise her as much as it delighted Eli. In the months between that visit and the clear winter night that followed, Malik found himself pulling back more than once, not out of any lack of feeling, but out of the particular fear that belongs only to a man who has already buried one great love and does not know whether his heart, or his son's, could survive risking another. He let calls go unanswered longer than he meant to. He found reasons to keep conversations brief, professional, safely bordered. Eli noticed the way children notice everything adults try to hide. You like her, Eli said one evening, watching his father stare at his phone without typing anything. Maybe? Then why do you keep taking so long to text her back? Malik set the phone down, searching for an answer that would make sense to a 9-year-old without frightening him. Because if I let myself really like her, and something happened to her, or to us, I don't know if I'd know how to survive it a second time. Eli considered this with the seriousness he brought to most things that mattered. But if you never let yourself like anybody again, isn't that kind of like something bad already happened anyway? Malik had no immediate answer for that, and the question stayed with him for days afterward, turning over in his mind on long stretches of empty highway the way certain sentences do when a child says something too true to easily dismiss. He drove out to see Ava eventually, not with an explanation prepared, just the plain truth of it. I've been slow to call you back, he said, not because I don't want to talk to you, because I'm scared of exactly how much I want to. Ava did not push him, did not rush to fill the silence that followed. I'm not in a hurry, Malik. I just need you not to disappear because you're scared. I've had enough people in my life disappear for worse reasons than that. That's fair. I'm not asking you to promise me forever. I'm asking you to keep showing up the way you did that first night, one storm at a time. Months later, on a clear winter night, with no storm in sight, Malik drove the Ravenport route. Again, Ava, riding beside him in the passenger seat, a new photograph of the three of them, taped beside the one of Eli near the dashboard. Eli's toy truck still resting on the console between them for luck. You remember what you said to me that first night? Ava asked, watching the snow-dusted pines blur past the window. About some other trucker finding Eli someday, and you needing to believe they'd stop? I remember. I believe it now too, Ava said, because you stopped for me. Malik smiled, keeping his eyes on the road, the old ache of losing Tanya still present, but no longer alone in the cab with him, sitting now alongside something new and cautiously, stubbornly hopeful. Then maybe that's the whole point, he said. Not that the world always stops for you, just that somebody, somewhere, always can. You just have to leave room for them to. Ava reached over and rested her hand lightly over his on the gear shift, not gripping, just present, the way a person rests a hand on something they intend to keep choosing, rather than something they need to hold on to by force. For what it's worth, she said, I'm glad it was you who found me. For what it's worth, Malik answered, so am I. The night Malik Johnson pulled his truck over for a stranger's blinking hazard lights, he thought he was losing a bonus that mattered to his son. He did not know he was gaining a family that would matter far more, built not from blood, but from the simple, stubborn decision to stop when stopping costs him something.